And this is Tom Salemi of Device Talks. Welcome to our final episode of Device Talks Tuesdays for our summer series. We'll be back in late August, which I know is still summer, but we'll just call that the fall season. So we've got a great presentation for you today, brought by our friends at the Med Institute, from patent to patient successes, challenges, and avoiding medical device development pitfalls. So we've got two great panelists, and going to have a really far-ranging conversation I'll get to in a moment, but we're going to need your help. We want a lot of questions. We want this to be fun and engaging. So you're not going to have another Device Talks Tuesday for another month. So come on, folks, give us lots of questions and be actively involved. We want to go out on a high note. So this is a virtual event. So if you're not watching this live, you're watching it on demand. If you are watching this live, you know someone who wants to watch it or should watch it on demand, please do let them know that they can register at devicetalks.com. We'll be taking, as I mentioned, questions mostly at the end. We've got a short presentation, and I know sometimes we say we'll have a short presentation followed by questions, and the presentation will go past 30 to 35 minutes. This is probably going to be like a 20-minute presentation, so just so you can pace yourself. You're welcome to ask questions during. In fact, as always, I invite you to ask questions as they come to mind so we know what's coming our way. But if we can address one of the questions during that presentation, we will. But our intention is to get through the slides and then just kind of have a free-ranging conversation with me as your question reader. And who knows, maybe I'll have a question of my own. If you're posting on this in social media, we really would love you to do so. Use hashtag Device Talks Tuesdays. I think we have to change that now. It's not tweet anymore, right? It's X with us, or maybe we'll just get rid of that reference entirely. We'll work on that for the fall season. So we are back to meeting in person. We'll be at Device Talks West, October 18th and 19th at the Santa Clara Convention Center. You can find information about that at devicetalks.com. You can find our podcasts at devicetalks.com. That's our Device Talks Podcast Network. They can subscribe to that at any major podcast player. Or you can, again, go to devicetalks.com, where you can sign up for future Device Talks Tuesdays as well. It's all right there, devicetalks.com. But happy to bring our presenters of today. We've got Steve Charleboy. He's the Vice President of Engineering, and Tyler Paynan, Principal and Co-founder of Ontogen MedTech. And I hope I said that correctly, Tyler. I focused on your last name and not on your company name. So you can correct me when it's your turn to talk. I think we're going to have just sort of a back and forth between you two. So I'm going to push the slide to get the presentation going. Steve, I think you're going to kick us off.
I am. Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it. Again, I'm with Med Institute. We're a CRO based in West Lafayette, Indiana, right outside of Purdue University. We're advancing the slide too fast here. So I'm going to go back. And we cover a wide range of medical device development services, everything from engineering, testing, regulatory, clinical, through computational analysis and regenerative medicine. So we'll go to the next slide. So I'd like to start just sort of to set the stage a bit. We all know that medical device development is what we're here to talk about. It's a stage-gated process. This is one version of it, very much our sort of way we think of it from our CRO business and how we work with our clients. But I thought I would just sort of give an example that was published it's a somewhat dated reference, but 2010 Make Hour, that showed the approximate cost at various stages of development. And this would be the average cost for the development of a device. This would be more of a class 2 device, is around $30 million. 24 or so million of that comes from FDA related activities, and about 5 million of that is engineering and development related. And here's the approximate timelines. One point to make on this slide is that, and this may become a theme as we get into conversations, sorry, I'm jumping here. Sorry about that. Let's get back to here. Is that the costs and the timelines that are incurred here during concept development in the earliest phases, keeping those in control and keeping the scope in control can really save money as you move into formal design and development. So we'll talk here about concept development. So in the earliest phases of development, some of just the important things to be aware of, really want to understand what problem are we trying to solve here? What is the device that we're working on? having a real clear and thoughtful effort to make that definition clear. We want to, and this has gotten more important, especially coming out of the pandemic, materials and components. Supply chain issues are real. There are back orders on very important materials for devices. If that hasn't been part of the process for concept development, it certainly is in the day and age we're in now. Developing test methods early, especially during formative phases of concept development, very important. Obviously, getting clinician input early. What is the value proposition? It really starts to get at, what's the business case for this device, and implementing design control early. We use terms like skinny risk analysis, and we start to build that even before the formal design controls kick in. And then once you've moved from proof of concept to the actual prototyping, where it goes from more of form during concept development, to function in the prototyping phase. I'll try to just keep this quick here. Things like, should we build a physical prototype or should we utilize computational analysis? It's important. Cost of goods analysis becomes quite important, and making sure that we, again, are engaging our clinicians. So I thought we've got 2 case studies here that I wanted to go through real quick, and then I'll throw it over to Tyler. Sorry, this keeps advancing on me here. So I try to corral the case study. So I've got 2. One is a CTO guide wire that the team here worked on, and the other is a thoracic endograph. So for the guide wire project that we did, this really encompassed the entire product life cycle, and there were some things that we learned. This is a 510K product. So the request from our customer was to really spearhead the research and development, de-risk the device. The exit strategy that was expressed early on was this was to be sold or licensed, and so it really had to be ready to launch by the time we were done. Clearing the safety and performance hurdles. The performance hurdles were significant, as this was meant to cross a chronic lesion. So the work that we completed here, this was real critical that we benchmarked this against the leading products, the state of the art for CTO wires. And so the team here did that and worked very closely with clinicians to address usability. Again, I would say that's something with this project that we did quite well and really learned and reemphasized the importance of doing usability studies early. And again, part of the ask was to start to build towards a risk management file and design history file. And so the team did that. So great project. Ended the way that this is one of those success stories, and I think we got real good positive response from our clinician. Oh boy.
Hey, Steve, I just want to tell everybody, so this is on us. I take responsibility because I bragged about our flawless execution just before the call. Steve was worried that I might have jinxed this, and I apparently did. The timer's on the presentation. I don't know what's going on with this. So, folks, you do have a PDF of the presentation. Steve, we can try to do this, but if you want to just give them the slide number you're referring to, maybe they can follow along on their PDF.
Okay.
Apologize for this happening.
Yeah, no, that's okay. This is slide 10. So again, good positive outcome of the project. We tested well against the leading products, and we put in there a blurb about substantial equivalence, which was the goal. So the second case study is for a next generation thoracic endograph that we worked on. The real focus of this was the verification and validation testing, but we had to build towards that. And there we go. We'll just lay that all out. So again, de-risking the device was the primary request. Oh boy.
So what slide do you want to be on? 12? I can get us back there.
Yeah, I'm going to be on slide 12.
All right. There we go.
There we go. Okay. I want to just lay out all the text here. Okay. So this one, there were a couple aspects of the design that were big advances in components particularly the graft fabric and the stents. And so one of the things that we learned from this and that you will run into is, you get ahead of the regulations. And in this case, the guidance documents for thoracic endografts or endografts in general are overly general, and that makes it very difficult to comply with those. And so we had a lot of work to try to advance the standards to catch up with the design that we actually worked on in this particular project. Thankfully, the team was really able to do that. We were able to benchmark the low profile graft fabric against the first generation or the earlier generation full thickness. We were able to march through verification and validation, which was substantial. And with these new requirements, it requires quite a savvy regulatory and clinical team to be able to meet the regulatory expectations and design the appropriate trials. So engineering working in conjunction with those other functional groups really was a recipe for success here. And let's see if we can cap this off, and I can hand it off to Tyler. Again, positive clinician response, which we always want to see. We were able to expand the number of patients that particular device was able to treat. And I will hand it off to Tyler at that point. Thanks.
Here you go, Tyler. Again, I'd like to apologize to the universe for messing with everything and for our hubris. So Tyler, if you just want to read along sort of what slide you're referring to with your presentation, and we'll do our best to follow along. So what slide are you starting with?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Starting with slide 13. As mentioned, my name is Tyler Panyon, co-founder of Ontogen MedTech. We're a Chicago-based product development firm specializing exclusively in medical devices. We help companies and primarily startups with navigating the path to market. Happy to be here with Steve at Med Institute. We have a very good collaborative relationship with them. Largely what we do at Ontogen MedTech, we like to break down the entirety of the pathway to market into three main buckets of effort. The first is the product design and development. This is kind of what we're typically most familiar with. This is the CAD work and the PCB schematics, things like that. And then there are two other buckets that are equally important. The second is design control and systems engineering. This is the effort to build out your design history file. This is the documentation that's going to go. Yeah.
I'm going to interrupt you, and I apologize. We're trying to load a PDF version to replace the PowerPoint. We will lose our animation,
okay,
but we won't skip around. So if we just riff for a minute, hopefully it'll come up, and then you can start your presentation off fresh.
Sure.
Just while we're waiting, and we can start again at the beginning. Steve, I just kind of want to circle back. You mentioned supply chain, the problems we've had. Are you still seeing the same? Have we seen an improvement from other folks we've talked to? Things seem to be getting better in some regards, although worse in others. How are you? What's the situation overall?
Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag for us, and maybe that's our experience. But we've run into issues. I think most recently we had an issue with getting material for a catheter. We were working on PBACs, I believe, was one of the issues. It depends on the phase we're working on, but typically we work around those issues when we're working early in concept development. We can find an alternative or an equivalent material. But as you move along, I think, as you get into formal development and once you're hitting design freeze and turning it over more formally to manufacturing or moving towards manufacturing, that gets a little more nerve-wracking. So I think it is a mixed bag. I think it's improving. There are still some outstanding examples of materials that are short, or they're being gobbled up at scale. And maybe when you're in the early phase trying to get them for prototypes, you're not priority, right? So that puts a special restriction on progress there.
Is it adding a percentage of time to the process, the timeline that you laid out earlier? You did reference it during that timeline, but how much, like 10%, 20%?
Yeah, I would say easily 10%. And in some cases, without careful planning and thinking of plan B, I would just say having a plan B, which means an alternative material. If you realize that that's going to be hard to get a hold of, it's important to have that.
So Tyler, I don't know if you saw the note, but if you could refresh your browser, you'll come right back onto the presentation, and hopefully you'll have access to a working presentation.
Sure.
Great. And again, once again, folks, you're welcome to ask questions at any point. I know the first go around has been a little confusing, and again, I'll take responsibility for that. All right.
Great. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Yep. Can you see the presentation where you're at?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to refresh myself so I can see it as well. So I'll be right back.
Okay.
Go ahead. You can start off though.
All right, very good. So as I stated before, my name is Tyler Panion, co-founder of Ontogen MedTech. We're a Chicago-based product development firm. We specialize exclusively in medical device development as a services company. We work with lots of companies, but primarily startups in navigating the path to market in development. Have a very good collaborative relationship with Med Institute. Happy to be here with Steve today. The way that we approach early stage medical device development, we kind of break down the different aspects and efforts that are needed into three main buckets. The first is product design and development. This is kind of the tactical, mechanical, electrical engineering, software engineering effort that needs to be done to actually design the product. The second one is design control, systems engineering. This is the effort that is needed to properly document your device in order to gain clearance or approval from the FDA. So this is the effort to put together all of the necessary documentation that ends up in your design history file, including standards compliance and verification, validation, all that sort of good stuff. And then the third bucket of services that we offer is building out quality management systems and then providing regulatory support for our clients. And then a couple QR codes for following us on LinkedIn or Twitter or X, as Tom mentioned, and our website below in case you want to follow us or keep in touch with us after this. So as Steve mentioned, I think Steve and I are in agreement that one of the key messages for today is that good product development is structured product development. And you may see that, the semantics of these different phases can be different across organizations. We have something a little bit different than Med Institute, and that's perfectly fine. The main theme here is that the core concepts are the same, which is, for Ontogen, when we run projects, we start with a feasibility and planning phase. And then phase two, the development phase, this is where you're really doing that heavy lifting design work. Phases 3 and 4 is your design verification, design validation. And then phases 5 and 6, your design transfer, product launch. This is not a etched in stone kind of plan. This is kind of a broad stroke. And the point here is that this can be tailored to unique company considerations. Sometimes for companies, we run in parallel design verification, design validation. There's some planning and some strategy that goes into this, but at a conceptual level, the idea is that you start with planning, you move on to your design work, and then you're doing your formal testing to substantiate that your product design meets the requirements that you set out in phase 1. And just as kind of a benchmark of expectation, how these 6 phases feed into the FDA process, specifically for class 2 devices that need to go through a 510K submission process, that typically happens at the completion of phase 4. And so we will often talk about, the first 4 phases of development as really being that pre-FDA effort to get through product design development. One of the key themes that I think we want to emphasize today, both Steve and I, is that as you get further into your phases of development, things start to get more and more expensive with each new phase that you undertake. And so some of the things that we'll talk about today are ways that you can set a proper trajectory early on in order to streamline those efforts, because you don't want to be making changes late in the game, because those changes in later phases can be far more painful and expensive compared to kind of setting the foundation properly early on. And today I'll specifically focus on our phase 1 effort and kind of what that means and the deliverables that we typically produce during that phase. It's one that's very often overlooked, yet so important. It's kind of like, breakfast being the most important meal of the day. This one really kind of sets the trajectory for the rest of your development effort. And so,
Tyler, I just want to take a moment. I'm sorry. Folks, if you're not being the presentation. And it seems like folks aren't having a problem, but just refresh your browser. You'll be brought right back in like 10 seconds. So the presentation's working fine for me. If it's not working fine for you, just refresh your browser. You'll be right back on. So that's it. Sorry, Tyler. You don't want to mess with your mojo.
No, that's okay.
Continue.
Yeah, no, thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. So phase one, this is the feasibility and planning phase. As I mentioned, this is really the phase where you're setting the trajectory for all your future design and development efforts. And this bullet list is kind of the key deliverables that we typically undertake in the phase one effort for our clients. And I just want to kind of talk through each of these and emphasize, how they fit in and how they do set that trajectory. Product development is never a straight line, but we do kind of strive for that. And following this kind of structured process can help avoid some speed bumps and hopefully dead ends during your process. So first and foremost, we like to put together a regulatory strategy. This is a very foundational document. This is a document where we formally outline what the classification of the device is and what the clearance pathway might be, whether that's 510K or whether it's a class 1 or whether it's a PMA. We define the product code. If the pathway is a 510K, we'll identify what we expect the predicates of the device to be and whether we feel like there is need for pursuing a 513G with the FDA, which is a way of defining the product code, or whether any pre-subs, Q-subs are warranted for the device. Second is a design and development plan. This is a formal document that we put together that is an effort to comply with ISO 13485. If you're doing medical device development, you should be complying with that standard. And section 7.3.2 of that standard says that you should plan and control the design and development of product. So that's what this document intends to do. It does things like identifying the team and the responsibilities of the members of the team, what those stages of development that I showed on my previous slide are expected to be for this particular project, what the deliverables at each phase are, things like that. Third, in the third category in phase one is risk management. We begin the risk management effort as required by ISO 14971. This starts with a risk management plan, which is required by section 4.4 of ISO 14971, and then we begin the risk assessment process by doing a top-down hazard analysis. And it's important, I think, to emphasize that we start this process before any design work is actually done, and sometimes that can bring up a question mark of how do you do hazard analysis when there's no design work done yet. And one of the key ways that we do that in this hazard analysis is by comparing to on-market competitors, looking at the mod database, looking at device recalls. Just as an example, as kind of a very small case study, and I don't think there's any attendees from Abbott, so I'll use Abbott as an example. Earlier in 2023, the Freestyle Libre reader went through a class 1 recall with the FDA, and the reason for that is that there's concern about if the device is used with the wrong USB charger, that can create a hazard. It can cause fire and things like that. So if I were sitting down and designing a comparable product that was similar to Freestyle Libre, that would be an important consideration for my design effort to maybe think about whether or not to use a USB charger and what kind of hazards that can feed into. And all of that happens before I've done any design work myself. So that's the risk management effort. On usability, sometimes we use the term usability, sometimes human factors. Ultimately, we're talking about compliance with the standard of ISO 62366. The FDA has been cracking down on this in the past few years, having pretty high expectations of complying with this standard. The first effort here is developing what's called a use specification. And within this use specification, we identify things like the user profile, who's using the device, what environment is it used in, the basic operating principle of the device, what the medical indication is. All of these things feed into understanding step-by-step use of the product and also foreseeable misuse. And again, all of this is done before you actually sit down and do any of your design work, CAD work. Next is requirements. Sometimes the FDA refers to these as design inputs. This is where you're formally documenting what you expect your device to do. User needs are the items that need to undergo design validation. The remainder of the requirements undergo design verification, which is typically benchtop performance testing. Those requirements can include things like complying with consensus standards, performance metrics, things like shelf life. And an important thing that I want to emphasize is usability and risk management need to feed into your design inputs. This is according to ISO 13485. There's an expectation, and in the FDA guidance document on design control, they have a statement that risk management begins with the development of the design input requirements. So that's why we, again, emphasize that risk management and usability are started in phase one and they feed into this requirements effort. The last thing that I'll mention on this slide is just technical architecture. We like to identify in a block diagram format, again, not design specifics, but at an architectural level, what the device is and how it works and what it does, inputs and outputs, user interface. This is also a good opportunity when it's a complex product to identify who's working on what. Oftentimes there's different contractors working on the project, so you can kind of draw those dotted lines to figure out who's responsible for what subsections of the device. All of this effort, our phase one effort is intended to help inform ultimately for any medical device development effort, what's it going to take to get it to market. And so this includes being able to identify your resource needs. Once you have your requirements, you have a clear understanding of the testing that you need to undergo. And for many of our clients that are startups, it helps inform what's the funding that's going to be necessary to get to market. So is it a $1 million, a $10 million, $100 million project? This phase one helps identify and kind of clear up those expectations for the future phases of development. As I mentioned, requirements, super important. We emphasize the importance of requirements all the time. A couple themes here are that requirements set your goal line. As an engineer myself and working with engineers, sometimes we have a hard time of knowing when the design work is done. The answer to that is your design work is done when your design meets all of your requirements that you've written out. So this helps you avoid both overdevelopment, underdevelopment. It helps you right size your funding that's required and your timeline. And requirements also matter because they help set your verification plan. Sometimes there's some uncertainty or a miss of expectations of what testing do I need to do on my device. And if you have developed a comprehensive set of requirements, it lays out your test plan very clearly. And so again, it avoids over or under testing your product. So just to dive into a couple case studies on some of these topics, the first is a wearable device that collects and transmits biometric sensor data. And this is actually an AI image that I generated in the interest of maintaining confidentiality for some of our clients. This is a client that we work with who is developing a wearable biometric sensor data device. And the client that we had worked with had already undergone a lot of design work and actually pilot manufacturing of the device before sitting down and going through this effort of defining the requirements for the device up front. What we ultimately found when we did a gap assessment on requirements, we determined that there was unfortunately not consideration for IP22 fluid ingress protection. This is required by the electrical safety standard IEC 60601-1-11 for devices that are used in the home. They had some concerns about being able to charge the device while it was in use. And so they wanted to, late in the game, kind of figured out that they wanted to make the charging port inaccessible during use. And then again, EMI considerations for compatibility with other devices. The point here is it ultimately required a pretty big backpedaling on the design and development effort in order to address these requirements that were kind of forgotten up front. Big time and time and cost penalties to having to go back and redesign, redevelop the device to comply with these requirements. As a second case study, this is on usability. This is a surgical device that we've helped develop. It's a surgical device that is sensor enabled and has a visual LED feedback to the user during operation. Again, on this product, we did that early usability work to identify how it would be used and what kind of user interfaces would be meaningful, and it ultimately determined that some kind of LED visual feedback would be meaningful to the user. And our initial prototypes of the device had a green, yellow, red LED indicator feedback for the sensor on the applied force during the use of the surgical device. And then once we got into phase 2 and started doing formative usability testing, we learned with some of this formative usability testing that the yellow LED was confusing users, and they would back off on the force when in fact they were supposed to continue with the same amount of force. So we ultimately determined that it was more disruptive than helpful. That usability process ultimately drove the elimination of the yellow LED down to a red, green only, which users have been very happy with, and it's proven very successful. So again, this is kind of a case study of the proper running of usability to inform that early feedback in the design process, as opposed to waiting until devices on market and finding out that we need to redesign and potentially recall or implement a quick revision of the design. So those are just a couple case studies of how we feel like this early structured product development, especially on a phase 1 effort, can be incredibly helpful in informing and streamlining device development through the remainder of the phases. So with that, I think I'll pass it back off to Tom.
All right, great. Steve, did you want to go back at all on your slides? Or are you comfortable with how things went? We don't have to go through them all over again. But...
No, that's just fine. I think we'll go ahead. I see some questions have come up. We can address those, and certainly we can go back to the slides if there's something specific that people want to review.
I mean, I'm just calling up this one, the development cost and timeline. Just a general question I have is, what if someone's, they're far along in this process already, and they haven't done the things that you're suggesting they should do beforehand? Is it too late to kind of play catch up?
It is not. It's not the preferred way. Obviously, the intent of medical device development is, follows the FDA waterfall diagram that everybody should be familiar with if they're not. But no, I mean, and we have examples where we've helped clients sort of remediate. I think it's important to know what documentation they do have and try to go back and build it forward again. No backdating of documents. I mean, everything is done, in a very, in the right way. But there are some holes that will have to be filled, tests that are going to be important. So it isn't the best way, but sure enough, you can go back. Tyler may have some other points to add to that.
You have a counterpoint, Tyler?
No counterpoint. Mostly agreement. Like Steve said, it's never too late. It's always better to do it up front rather than remediate later. We've worked with lots of clients at lots of stages who, have had to undergo that remediation effort. And it's very doable. But as mentioned, the longer that you wait in order to implement some of these structures and processes, sometimes things are missed or forgotten, and you do have to do, a fair amount of backpedaling. So that's the hope. But it's never too late to implement good processes, good systems, to start your effort to be fully compliant with the regulations and the standards that are necessary. So yeah.
We have some interesting examples where studies are done, so non-clinical studies that are done not in accordance with GLP, and going back and having to try to map those to the GLP requirements. So there are always ways to go back. It isn't the preferred way to go. It adds more time and more cost, so it's always helpful to as early as possible implement those the right way.
Okay. Well, let's, as you mentioned, Steve, we have a lot of questions from the audience. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. First question, I'm going to Chuck, who I think Chuck's probably one of our longtime listeners of Device Talks Tuesday, so it's great to see his name up there again. He and I connected a couple of years ago when we first started this in 2020. So, and I believe he's referring to this. This question is, the first step is efficient problem definition. What is efficient problem definition? and I found that on this slide here. So I think that's what we're referring
Yeah,
to. Steve,
yeah.
can
Okay.
you expand on that a little bit?
Sure, sure. Probably not the best word to use, efficient, but certainly defining the problem. What are you solving is critical, and I think we move into development programs. In my experience, you're very excited and you kind of think what you're actually trying to solve, and so I would say efficient, maybe better is just effective, is it a what are you making? Often I think and I have examples in my own past of you spend so much time trying to solve a technical problem and do proof of concept that when it translates into the prototype or the functional device, you've sort of lost track of what is the problem that this device is solving, what clinical problem. So I just think taking more time to think about that, and then of course that feeds forward into the formative and summative aspects of concept development and getting to a concept freeze.
Tyler, anything to add to that, or I know that was Steve's slide.
No, I don't think so. Steve did a great job.
I appreciate the efficiency. So next question from Zach. I'm looking for the reference. He asks, what constitutes the DHF? Steve, maybe you know what slide he's referring to.
Don't think we have that in the slide, although I might, I don't know, Tyler, you want to take a stab? I can add to it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like where, I don't know off the top of my head where it's formally defined by the FDA or otherwise, but essentially your design history file constitutes everything that defines not only the design of your device, but your process in designing the device. So this will include things like a risk management file, which I hinted at. It'll include all of your design inputs and design outputs. So that's requirements, and then your schematics, drawings, everything like that that define the device. And then it will also include all of your formal design verification testing, design verification reports, design validation efforts, all of your standards compliance, everything like that all wraps up into your design history file. And ultimately, when you do a submission to the FDA, you are submitting your design history file.
Yeah. The only thing I would add is the design history file is a living, breathing entity that will, can be referred to and returned to as the project goes on. So it's I think everything that Tyler said is spot on. It defines the device, the design of the device, and the development of the device.
And I'm going to jump ahead because Zach asked a question I think is of interest to a lot of people on these presentations. His direct question is, how do you work with very small cash-strapped startups? They usually don't have a ton of resources. They don't have the VC backing. So my broader question is always like, what's the smallest company you'll work with? What's the biggest company? What are the kind of companies you work with? And how do you make it work with startups who don't have a lot of extra cash?
I'll start, and Tyler will want to weigh in this. We do here at Med. We work with a lot of startups and a lot of physician and clinician inventors, TTO spinouts, where it may just be one or two people, and we do have that discussion up front. And I think one of the early questions we'll ask is, have you thought what's your exit? What's your strategy? What are you aiming towards? And often they will have thought that through and they have an answer. Sometimes they haven't. I think the other thing we try to do is if there's, obviously they're coming to us in our business, we typically start with a client who has come out of a provisional or not provisional patent. The idea phase is sort of been surmounted, and they're getting ready to reduce that idea to practice and develop it as a proper device. We want to have a discussion about where do they think they are along that stage gate process, because often there's maybe a misunderstanding, or it's not well calibrated. They may think they're further along than they actually are. But for us, we also try to time it to fundraising, right? I mean, there are certain milestones that you can get to, and deliver for them so that they can fundraise off of that. And we at least in our own business, we tailor our services very much in line with small companies and their fundraising activities. And so, Tyler, I'll let you add anything that you might have that's unique.
Yeah, I like all that. What we kind of laid out, both Steve and I, is sort of an idealized pathway of product development. And I think we both have a good appreciation that, especially for startups, it's not always that way. And so sometimes you have to consider, what's best for the company, and the startup doesn't necessarily align with this perfect plan. Oftentimes the way that we work with startups is we think about what does the startup need in order to unlock more funding, right? And that may not be following this exact trajectory that we laid out. Sometimes the ways that we get started with clients, we will help them put together an SBIR application for government funding. We'll help them with early prototyping. Oftentimes it's driven by feedback they get from investors to say, hey, investors will say, we want to see this XYZ before we're ready to invest. And so those are the things that we'll prioritize. We really don't have a lower limit on the size of company that we work with. We work with a very small, very early companies, sometimes physicians and individual entrepreneurs, pre-funding. And other areas that we help is just sitting down again and kind of crafting a formal strategy around what's it going to take, so that when you as a founder, when you go out and ask for money from VCs, you can intelligently ask for the right amount of money and be able to back that up with a clear and comprehensive plan of, here's how I'm going to use that money, here's where it's going, these are the people that I need, this is the testing I need to do. So that's one of those early areas that we help with. Sometimes we'll do kind of piecemeal regulatory strategies and things like that, but it's ultimately driven upon trying to help them always hit the next milestone and unlock more funding with their investors.
That's a great point. Kind of a chicken and egg sort of thing. If they have a firm like yours on their team, then maybe they met their more attractive investment targets. So we'll knock out a couple of quick ones. I do want to tell folks, like, the people at Met are great. If we're trying to answer your question but we're not quite getting it, just put follow up in the Q&A box, and someone will reach out and make sure the question is answered. This is a fun but not always precise process. Or if you just want a follow up question, you don't want it addressed on the presentation, put follow in the Q&A box, and someone will follow up with you. So Brian specifically had asked, what is the usability ISO STD? And then he offered 62366. So is this a one we can knock out easily? I don't know if you know exactly what that slide is referring to.
That was one that I mentioned. I'd be curious to hear Steve's input on usability. But yeah, the standard is IEC 62366. That's the consensus standard that governs usability of medical devices. And there's an expectation from the FDA that you comply with that for your devices. Steve, I don't know if you have anything else to say on that.
I think I said it earlier. It's funny. I've been doing this a long time, and usability has gotten certainly more attention here in the most recent years, and I think rightly so. I mean, I can remember when we used to do limited releases of devices and instruments, and we would learn things out in the field in real time, and we'd have to pull it back. And certainly that's not the way. That's not a great way to go about it. It's expensive. So I do think usability. Again, I said it earlier. Pulling that early into concept development is becoming more and more just a smart thing to do, is to address those usability concerns as early as possible.
And Dakota asks, how do you accelerate your medical device development? How do you minimize downtime during a project? Kind of a general question, but are there some hacks or something, or things that folks can do?
Boy, wow. That's a great question. It's a good question. It's obviously, I don't know. I mean, I'll give you a couple of mine. I think, proof of concept, and this is probably my own bias, having worked more in research and discovery for most of my career, you never want to let sort of the fundamental technical challenge with a device find its way into anywhere near formal device development, right? You want to be able to address that as early as possible. So that's, in terms of speed bumps that can affect your acceleration, boy, that's a big one. Downtime, good planning, good planning, and things are going to go wrong. I think, having a good team, having a team with experience can help, whether that's baked internally to the team or you're working with a good consulting group like Onogen or, Submit Med, and there's plenty of them out there, right? I think, that can help. I don't know. I could think of other things, but I'll let Tyler weigh in on that.
Yeah, so I'm gonna unabashedly put on my sales hat for Ontogen right now. I mean, it's ultimately, this is part of our fundamental business model, which is there's always downtime during product development, right? And there's throughout those phases, there's certain areas where there's heavy focus, and a lot of those things will go dormant at certain times, right? So phase 2 is where you need all your mechanical, electrical, software engineers working, 120-hour weeks or whatever it is. But then that slows down as you get into formal testing, right? And things like that. So there's a natural cadence. And so, one approach to that is you hire, a full-time team internally, and you pay them all on payroll, and, you're paying for that downtime. Our business model in Ontogen is you pay us for the time that we work on the project. So during that downtime, you're not paying for us. And so it provides, it maybe doesn't, there's only so much time acceleration you can do for some of these things. When Steve mentioned lead times and time to build product and prototypes and things like that. But the idea there is that at least you're only paying for what you need when you work with a company like us or with Med Institute. You're paying by the hour. You're paying for what you need, and when those downtimes come, you can kind of turn the faucet off a little bit and wait for those materials to arrive and things like that.
Yeah, it's the luxury you have when you work at a big company, right? At least my experience, you have full support from functional teams, they're different models, but when you're doing it as a startup, you got to be able to pull that from wherever you can find it to be able to support you through the development process.
Right. We'll run through some more of these questions. So we've got Ruth. Ruth is from Kenya. Ruth, thank you for listening. She asked, what does it mean when a device has been recalled for redesign when it comes to the already set budget? Device has been recalled. This is question number 29 for redesigning when it comes to the already set budget. I'm not sure if that's. And again, if we're not able to answer your question, Ruth, someone can follow up with you to make sure we get it. But I just wanted to throw it out there for the panel. And if it's not something we have a clear answer for, we can just move on to the next question.
This is after a device has been approved, it's out in the field, and it has been recalled. Yeah. You have to address that. It's almost a question that answers itself, or maybe it is going to have to fall within the budget, or it will be off the market. I think one thing I would say is that's the price of getting a device out into the marketplace is post-market surveillance and sustenance of devices, and obviously companies are learning that more and more. It's as much effort to keep a device on the market as to get it on the market.
Right, Ruth. If you need a follow up, please just put it in the inbox, and someone will get back to you. Someone from Med will get back to you. Eric asks, what does skinny risk analysis mean?
Yeah. And I heard Tyler address this as well. That's our term, and I guess I've seen it, so I don't think we've coined it here at Med. But the idea of starting to address risks before formal design control kicks in, we do start to collect those risks. I think Tyler had a great example of the Avid device and the USB. I mean, we do a lot of work to try to identify both user needs or customer needs and non-customer needs. And that's very early in the development process. And that can also lead, that process of identifying needs can lead to identifying risks to the device. And we certainly want to know what those are. And we want to, as much as we can, start to mitigate those risks even before the formal risk analyses are performed during the design control phase.
Great. Anything to add, Tyler? Or we've got more questions. So Rajiv asks, with SW heavy devices, and I'm sorry, I don't know what that is, how does the process get adjusted, especially in light of data security requirements?
Tyler, I'll hand that. Maybe if you feel comfortable on that one, we don't do a lot with software, but
software heavy devices.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, software heavy devices. So I'll preface my answer by saying we don't do any software exclusive devices like any digital health, things like that. That's not our area of expertise. We do develop a lot of devices that have software integrated into them, that are hardware software combo devices. There's a parallel process for a software development that mirrors the hardware development, which is primarily what we focused on today. The FDA doesn't require it, but following IEC 62304 is an incredibly good idea. The FDA guidance on software development sets a lot of the same expectations that IEC 62304 does. At a very high level, you're doing the same things that we laid out for hardware. You're defining your architecture up front, you're defining requirements, you're setting up a test plan, you're testing your software against your requirements, you're putting together reports, things like that. Be happy to kind of take that conversation offline, but that's at a fundamental level, that's what it looks like.
Okay, work for you, Steve?
That works for me.
All right, cool. So let's see. We have let's see. Hold on, sorry.
So 36. That's an interesting.
Yeah, we are. So yeah. Do your 36? From Charlie? Do your customers provide all requirements, or will your firm provide requirement generations as well, if desired?
Yeah, and I again, Tyler can weigh on this one. We do. We will work with clients to help generate user needs or needs development. And those will eventually be translated into design input requirements. And so I guess, we will work with clients to generate those, but generally it's a collaboration because they know their product. And we certainly have experience in the certain particular experience in areas of medical devices. And so it can work quite well where there's an interplay between the customer and us. So I guess the answer is yes, we do.
Yeah, it's the same for us. We typically requirements is a collaborative effort with our clients. Just with the experience that we have and the variety of projects that we worked on. There's recurring themes across different devices and different applications and disease states where we know kind of off the top of our head what the standards you'll need to comply with and some considerations around performance. But oftentimes clients will come to us and say, look, I need the device to do this, this, and this in order to be effective. And a lot of times that, when we work with physician clients, they're seeing a real clinical need in front of them every day. And they say, look, I just need this thing to do X, Y, Z. And then, we work with them to translate that into something that's testable and quantitative and things like that. But, it's a collaborative effort, definitely.
Yeah, and again, that's often I think where probably the value of what Tyler does and what we do is being able to translate that into a properly defined need, and then eventually a design input requirement for verification and then eventually validation back to that user needs. So yeah, that's a big part of what we do.
Okay, great. So we have just about 5 minutes left for questions. We'll continue to work through these. If you have some, please ask them. We'll try to get to them on the air, so to speak. Or if we're unable to get to them, someone will definitely get back to you. So if you have questions, let them come. And again, if we don't address them here, we'll address. You can get a call from Med and get them answered. So, this question from Brian regarding the timeline, and I'm guessing this is the timeline. Shouldn't clinical trials be done before regulatory submission? Do you not need the safety and efficacy data? So I'm looking at the timeline. Steve, is that?
Do you want to start with that, Steve, or do you want me to?
You need to get approval to do a clinical trial. So that it, by its very nature, is a regulatory process. So maybe that's short shrifting the question, but the clinical trials are part of the approval process, and the regulatory submission is you will submit your clinical plan and receive approval to start either an ID or an IND study, depending on the nature of the device or the drug.
Great.
Yeah, and I think I would.
Go ahead, Tyler. Sorry.
Oh yeah, no, I was just going to add on to that. Steve's exactly right. I was also going to say that my answer to it was it depends. It depends on the specifics of the type of product it is and the product code that it is and the classification that it is. There's lots of devices out there that don't require any human clinical trials before it goes on the market. A lot of class 2 devices don't require any human testing. And so, safety and efficacy, depending on the device, can be demonstrated either in a combination of cadavers or preclinical in vivo animal testing or, benchtop testing. So it ultimately depends. And I think that's where, again, sitting down and crafting that strategy up front, having a sound understanding of your regulatory strategy, all of that informs, what's the timing of doing a clinical trial. The other quick comment that I would say is a lot of times clients are interested in having claims for their product that can only be generated from a human clinical trial. And oftentimes we will provide the strategy that they should wait until they get initial clearance and then do that as a post-market study, because clinical trials are very expensive. So, you want to kind of delay that as long as possible, depending on your funding considerations.
Excellent. Yep.
All right.
Agree with all that.
Quickly, Zach asks, are we naive to think that the NIH will fund full development from POC to FDA-approved market-ready device? I'm not sure if we're naive, but go ahead.
I think there is a fair amount of the non-dilutive funding through grants. We find ourselves on a lot of those. So I don't know about all the way through to a full approved market-ready device, but certainly some of that funding is helpful and useful to develop a medical device and can get it pretty far towards that goal.
Yeah, I think it's not unheard of to get all the way with non-dilutive funding, but I think that would be a rare exception. The rule is typically non-dilutive funding from like an SBIR will dovetail into private funding. Part of the consideration is just that the timelines involved for SBIR funding is typically much slower than the timelines for VC funding and things like that. So there can be some cognitive dissonance on the pace of product development when it comes to that. So typically that's why you see some, it's some combination of the two, is largely driven by trying to maintain an accelerated pace when you start bringing in private money.
Right. In fact, the non-dilutive funding can help with fundraising. Right. It's a good endorsement to have NIH funding. So I think they can play off each other and support each other towards getting to that approved device or cleared device.
Real quick, Amir asks, where will discovery and concept generation fall in Tyler's phase development? I hope I have the right slide up. I think it should be done earlier, what I call phase 0.
Yeah, so that is often part of phase 1, whether you want to call it a phase 0, phase 1. I didn't spend a lot of time talking about it, but yes, there's really kind of a handful of things that we like to demonstrate during that phase 1 effort before you go through that stage gate process and say, hey, let's move on to phase two. The first is all of that planning that I largely focused on. The second thing, oftentimes, depending on what the device is, demonstrating clinical merit is a big one, right? So for some projects that we work on, they're trying to do something physiologically that's not proven yet, right? And so you want to have some basis of the physiology and the science behind that it's going to be effective to provide the clinical benefit that you want it to. So that's one of the things that we often focus on in phase one. And we also do proof of concept prototyping, which probably falls into what's being discussed here, right? It's not to do the full design and hash out design details. It's proof of concept. And so really the other way that we talk about that is technical de-risking. You want to identify any risks from a technical standpoint that could be showstoppers in your development, right? If it's too technically complex or expensive or it doesn't work out, you want to figure that out in phase one. And so sometimes we'll do very quick and dirty prototyping to tease those things out so that you don't end up going way down a big dead end in phase two, right? So you want to do very quick and dirty prototyping in phase one. That's what that concept generation, discovery kind of things, that's what I would expect. And that's part of what we often do in phase one.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, this is one I'll not bite on it too much because I've lived this for a long time. I think often there is a phase zero. I think that's correct. But I agree. It sometimes gets a little blurry as to where that line is. I think proof of concept, sussing out the technical, the issues that would slow or halt development as early as possible is critical. I would also say there's something that gets thrown out, summative testing or killer experiment, I think is a sort of a fancy way to say it, but that experiment that will avoid moving a design that and putting too much money and trying to perfect a design that otherwise should just stop. It's not going to meet the requirements or the needs. So during that phase one or the feasibility prototyping phase, there's a couple opportunities to sort of have a sober look at the project and the device.
All right, great. Well, we're just past 5 o'clock. We've got some more questions coming in, which are great. Some folks saying they'd like to have someone follow up. So if anyone else would like that to happen, please indicate in the Q&A box, and someone from Med will follow up. This last question I want to ask, it came early on, but I was trying to get to the technical ones first. Someone just asked, Lindsay asked, does the panel have recommendations for developing a medical device specific training plan for entry-level engineers? I'm not sure if that's out there or not, but just wanted to throw that to Steve and Tyler.
Great, super question. We have a pretty robust student corps here. We get a lot of Purdue students that come through our intern and co-op program. When we bring on junior engineers, so they get a training, on-the-job training there. It's a great way to develop. Once you've hired in a junior engineer, we spend a lot of time with mentoring and trying to build out their I have a colleague who talks about their technical toolbox, right? We want to make them useful so that we can have them add value to customer projects, run a test, help to develop a document that will go into somebody's design history file. So, it's the usual ways. I think on-the-job training is how we approach it. Certainly there are plenty of great webinars and online resources, but there's nothing like getting them, involved. And in our case, they're working on client projects about as early as we can get them to.
Tyler, last word, anything to add?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I guess my answer is a little more boring than Steve's, which is, all the information that's needed is largely publicly available, or, you can gain access to the appropriate consensus standards, but all the FDA regulations are public. Having a skill as an early engineer of being able to dive into either the regulations themselves or the standards themselves and read and understand and comprehend and be able to apply them. That's kind of the most critical, skill for early product developers. And I agree with what Steve said. You can't replace good on-the-job training and seeing firsthand, real examples and seeing how good engineers respond and react and apply principles to real world conditions. So unfortunately, it's the kind of thing where you kind of have to just pay your dues on working in the field and learning from experience and finding good mentors and things like that to really excel.
Yeah.
All right, terrific. Well, the virtual house lights are on. They're telling us we don't have to go home, but we can't stay here on Device Talks Tuesdays. So it's been a great conversation. Thank you, Tyler and Steve, for sharing your insights, and to the audience for delivering great questions. Thanks, everybody, for being part of this. Thanks, gentlemen, for joining us.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
All right. And thanks, everybody, for being part of our summer season of Device Talks Tuesdays. We'll be back in late August, starting up our fall season. I think we've got one every Tuesday going through the holidays. So take a look at those opportunities to improve your skill sets. And please come on back to Device Talks Tuesdays and have a great rest of the summer. Thanks for joining us.